I'm here today with John Hickey, whose bio I'm going to read. John Hickey is a writer from Minnesota. He earned an MFA from Cornell University and was a Stegner Fellow in Fiction at Stanford University. His short stories have appeared in numerous journals such as Virginia Quarterly Review, Gulf Coast, and the Massachusetts Review, among other places. He is a member of the Lac du Flambeau band of Chippewa Indians. He lives in San Francisco with his wife and two sons.
That's me.
Yeah, there's a couple things left out from there that there's no University of Wisconsin reference. So I was like, what's going on there? I feel like that should be the number one degree that's mentioned.
Yes, of course. I That was an oversight. The University of Wisconsin Madison made me.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I wanted to ask you, I'm sure you've been talking a bunch about these last like 10 years or so and the process of writing this specific novel, but I wanted to ask you kind of like go even farther back than that, talking about your like actual writing journey and more than the specific book, how you got into writing, how you decided it was for you, and then like what kind of stuff you were writing over that time period. Was it similar to Big Chief? Was it not? That's a broad question, I know, but I just wanted to kick it off and let you talk a little bit.
I don't remember a specific moment in my childhood or anything like that where it was like, I'm going to be a writer. My grandfather on my father's side had ambitions about it and maybe pretensions, that he kind of lived a sort of writer lifestyle. He had the typewriter and he took a couple stabs at novels. And when he died, I inherited his typewriter. So maybe that was it, just getting that you know, heirloom. I don't remember becoming a big reader until maybe my middle school years. I started reading Stephen King. That was a big one because I remember getting into the short stories. I don't know if you've read Stephen King short stories.
I haven't. That's interesting that you were reading short stories so young. I don't even think I knew that that was a thing until I got to college.
It was funny because what brought me to Stephen King was the big long The Stand, which is like 1,000-page novel or 1,000-page plus, whatever. But I don't know. I don't know why, but I got into those stories. And the thing about those collections, there's a couple of them. One of them was Skeleton Crew, and but they have a section in the back which is an annotated list of the stories. So he kind of goes back and he talks about the origin of the story, or what inspired the story. And I remember being very interested in those things. And I think that those are the maybe the first exposures to the craft of writing, the craft of short story writing. And that this is a living thing. This is a thing that you can do now. It's not something that lives in the past, right? But I don't think like the wheel really clicked until college, maybe. That there was this sort of path to getting a book out or learning how to write. And I was a lost 19-year-old, I think, and just like arrived at the University of Wisconsin, which I left out of my bio. Sorry, Wisconsin. But I was a freshman there, and just kind of casting about, looking for a place. I can't remember exactly how I wandered into Ron's office, Ron Kuka's office. But what he laid out was like, oh, sounds really interesting. You go to these workshops and you write and you create these stories and you talk about them and you talk about them seriously. I don't think that I really encountered that before, and I was intrigued by that. So I took the first. I think I got into the intermediate workshop the first time
Hmm.
around, and then I just kept on taking workshops. And then they, started. They just kept on letting me take workshops. I don't know. I ingratiated myself with the faculty there, but they never told me to stop.
That's good. That's a
So
good sign.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
a good sign, and I took the advanced workshop eventually and started hearing about these things called MFA programs. And the thing was is that the faculty there at Wisconsin, I want to say that most of them were Iowa grads. Like, oh, the Iowa Writers Workshop. Wow, like all these, people went there. So I got it into my head that that was a place that I wanted to go. And then there's the stirrings of the ambition, I think, and maybe like the competitiveness a little bit. As an undergrad that doesn't play sports, that doesn't like do those sorts of things. I found some sort of like I was competitive a little bit. and that kept me coming back, and that kept me, there's a little spark there. I don't think it was a toxic sense of competition, but it was competition. And then they had the best new American voices, the anthology,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
Tobias Wolff had written the introduction to this thing. And I'd known Tobias Wolff as the guy from the movie This Boy's Life. Are you familiar with this?
No, 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 no.
It's worth seeing, I think. But
Okay.
it's Robert De Niro and it's Leonardo DiCaprio. And
Oh,
Leonardo
wow.
DiCaprio, it's like it's a memoir, right? And it's Tobias Wolff's, early life
Oh, that's
when
really
he was,
interesting.
yeah, when he was a kid with this abusive stepfather played by Robert De Niro. So, anyways, it was a familiar name, and he was writing about these workshops again. So I'm learning about workshops. I'm learning about that. This is a thing. I didn't know it was a thing. And he was talking about the Stanford writing program, the Stegner Fellowship.
Hmm.
This is like, I don't know, I was 19 or 20 when I was reading this. So it was like, I had no idea. I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds like something to do. Yeah, that sounds like I'll just do that.
Yeah,
You know,
easy enough.
I'll just, go to Iowa and then I'll go to Stanford
Yeah,
and then famous writer.
straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that was the course I embarked upon. And I don't know what I was writing. I mean, like what I remember undergrad being was learning, just brushstrokes. The stories were that I was writing were maybe a little bit more high concept rather than truthful, I guess, if you follow.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
there was a certain quirkiness I think I was going for. I won a contest there for a story about an Abraham Lincoln impersonator. I don't know where that came from. Honestly, I have no idea. I have no
That's a
like
great idea.
it was an idea, but it was an idea. It wasn't like an emotional heartstring sort
Yeah.
of thing. It was
Yeah.
just like this sort of curiosity of like, here's a guy that goes about looking like Abraham Lincoln all the time. So then you put them in a situation and this and that. They were imitations. They were imitations of the stories that I admired. My reading base was maybe limited to, your classics, your Ernest Hemingway and maybe some Raymond Carver. Here's Raymond Carver. Everybody was teaching Raymond Carver at the time.
Ron's still pushing that. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Hardcore.
he's
Yeah.
good. He's Raymond
Yes,
Carver.
he's great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But there was a time, and I think I was at maybe the tail end of it where that was the fashion. That you just teaching Raymond Carver stories. I don't think I really knew what I wanted to write about. I think that I was dancing around it, and I think that I was maybe obscuring it from myself. It's hard when you're a young writer. You kind of scrambled by what you think is expected, and also um like there's a tendency to promote things in your life into bigger things than they actually are. Talking to a friend about this is just like, in your stories, girlfriends become wives, apartments become houses, like these things sort of expand so that they appear to be like to have the world weariness of your Raymond Carvers, and that gets you further from the truth a little bit. There's this insecurity there, and if that insecurity is there, I think you wear it. I think a lot of people do. I think it's very difficult to lose that if you're fighting from the truth of things. So I was doing a lot of that, but in grad school, something weird happens to your brain, because you're at these places and you're amongst all these intellectuals, these brilliant people, like in the Cornell English department. I think the writing gets a little bit postmodern.
Mm.
Yeah, I think they had a postmodern novels class, which was not good for any of us. Because then and then we all start wanting to write like Thomas Pynchon, and
Yeah.
got crying of Lot 49 style names in our stories, and mysterious symbols that are never explained, and playing with things. And it was playing, and it was what it was.
Yeah.
We were experimenting with these things, and like drugs, you know. Yeah, got hooked on postmodernism. I started getting into Invisible Man. I know we were talking about this earlier. That oh no. Oh
Cameo
no.
from the Ron Kuka.
Oh,
How you doing, John?
I'm good. I was just reminiscing about being a lost 19-year-old showing up to your office. and
Talks
being
about
led
mysteriously
astray.
mysteriously winding up in Ron's
Oh
office.
wow, it happens.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
teleport.
Happens to
yeah.
everybody.
I don't remember exactly how it happened, but yeah, that did
Yeah.
affect the course of my life, which
Wow.
is
Okay.
for better or worse. For better, for better. Yeah,
For
it
For
was.
sure.
better.
It's
Definitely
Okay.
for
definitely
better.
a good thing. It's definitely a
Quick
good
question.
thing.
Are those your dad's guitars on the wall?
They are mine.
They're yours.
I'm a grown man now, Rob.
Oh my God. See, I didn't get the memo.
I'm an adult. I get my own guitar.
I
Yes,
got to
yes.
take
Those.
off, man, but I'm going to see you the 30th in Milwaukee.
I'll see you on
Sounds
April
good.
30th.
Take it easy on
Yeah,
this
I'm
guy.
looking forward to it. I'm trying. I'm trying.
Okay.
I was saying yes that I was getting into the novels that were, more important to me. I think, just like that I look at it like you got the undergrad and your grad program experience. And for me, I went very, very young. So I was, still also figuring out life. And the sort of extended adolescence of that, staying in school for a long time and not really going out into the world and getting, I don't know, real world experience.
Hmm.
And but what I look at it is it's just this long, long reading period, and being exposed
Mm.
to other other books, and like deeper intellectual pursuits, bumping into pretension, but also like finding the things that are actually landing. And also, I came up at a time, I think, and I recognize it as kind of like the end stage of that old school thing that was kind of set in the 1970s, 80s, the Raymond Carver era,
Yeah.
the people will talk about, but I don't know, that sort of New Yorker era, the last vestiges of it. And what I realized a couple years later was that that is a very, male centric canon. And that had been like a huge blind spot of mine, for a long time, and I think just because, like I had grown up in that era, so having to diversify, that reading and kind of try to reverse that and just try to
Mm.
open my mind up to other things. So yeah, I got really into Invisible Man. I mean, there's a few reasons for that. There it is. That is a nice. Can I see that again? That's a
It's
nice.
my dad's. Yeah.
The commemorative edition.
Yeah.
That is really nice. I got the fake first edition over here. They make
Oh
it
yeah.
look like it appeared.
Yeah. Very cool.
Um, yeah, which is yeah, and my actual editions, the ones that I carried throughout college and grad school, the nice and beat up and
You beat up multiple Invisible Mans.
oh, yeah, you're right. I did. I marked up. I don't know if you can see my marks, but I marked up these ones, and they were the ones that traveled with me in my bag. The satchel,
Yeah.
as I was,
Yeah.
traveling between classes and um, or down to New York City. I'd go visit there. Because so close. Not really, it was 4 hours away, but it still felt like it was close. Like, oh, the big city.
Yeah.
And I think that the ambition that I had, aside from the content of Invisible Man, was to, write a book that, somebody like me would carry around in their satchel and beat up and mark up. And, that would, that seemed to be like the goal. Like one day that I would write a book like that. And what that book was, I didn't exactly know, but I was edging around these
Yeah.
reservation stories.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's super interesting that you got so deep into that book that like you just had it with you all the times. What was it about Invisible Man, even All the King's Men, which were the two books I read for this, and I have some questions
Yeah.
relating to them for later on. But like, what was it about those books that were like, this is like the thing, especially like to read the same book over and over, to always have it around with you. You're obviously foregoing finding a lot of new literature and things like that. You're like, this is it. This is as good as it gets. What was that?
Yeah. With Invisible Man, it was an identification with the narrator, who feels disconnected from, let's say, the community. He feels maybe ostracized in ways that I wasn't, but I mean, I still felt like distant from my mother's family. The reservation that they're from, which is Lactoflambeau, as we said earlier.
Hmm.
So I felt like there was that, in betweenness of, I don't present a certain way, that I don't look a certain way. Nobody ever guesses that I'm, indigenous,
Hmm.
by looking at me. Like, it comes out in conversation, of course, but like it's not like a thing where like bam, like where I'm from. Um so there was something about that I recognized, and going further from that, just that the absurdities of that existence, feeling disembodied in ways.
Hmm.
And what thought was that, you have this book and there's like this sort of way of thinking about it that makes it make sense in its absurdities, like accepting the absurdities, but like somehow it all makes sense. And if I read it enough, that I would figure it out too. And yeah, I don't know if that was true or not. I don't think it helped. But what it also became was that it's like this, sort of keystone to all this other literature. The prologue of Invisible Man. Right off the bat, you have Dostoevsky,
Hmm.
right? You move into Melville, something that's like basically just lifted from Melville. The sermon on the blackness of black. If
Oh, really?
you
Okay.
remember this, yeah, yeah. So that little snippet there. I mean, that's basically directly from Moby Dick, from the beginning of Moby Dick.
That's super interesting.
And
Yeah, I haven't read Moby Dick, but that's fascinating.
yeah, I can't remember when I read Moby Dick. It wasn't until my 30s, but you come to that one at the right time. Otherwise, a lot is lost, I think.
Okay.
But it is something you do have to do eventually, I think. It's a great book. People don't give it credit. Let's say Moby Dick. People don't give Moby Dick credit for it being wry and funny.
Really? Okay. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
that's one that I'm terrified of for sure.
it's the big giant American
Yeah.
novel, and it's got to be serious, right? And it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
big whale, like, and it's an amazing thing, that book, by the way. I'm on a tangent now, but I'm just going to do it.
No, I love it.
Um,
Yeah.
there's just like those images, because like whaling, like you just like have this, I don't know, it's a very distant sort of idea of like what whaling is, but like there's in the book, it's this very visceral and literally visceral um thing, like I think there's one point they're hunting the whales. They only take the heads, right?
Hmm.
Because they're only trying to get the oil in their heads. I can't remember what the oil's called, but they throw the rest away. And this ship is just going about the ocean, and it's got like two severed whale heads on either side of, hanging off of either side of the ship. And as an image, it's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just metal, you know. like,
That's crazy.
it- it's crazy. And the blubber room, like they're cutting up the blubber in the blubber room, and it's just like,
Okay.
knives and things, and people slipping all over the place, and that sort of thing. But the original point being that Melville's got a voice. Melville's funny. He's wry and ironic, and you see it in White Jacket, you see it in Moby Dick, and you also see it in like Invisible Man. When Ralph Ellison takes up the mantle, because Ralph Ellison's funny, and maybe to the point of being a little too cute, like with the names later on in the book. Um, he starts getting, making some easy jokes, but like that's landing with me too. Like, you can be funny, you can talk about these things, and they're very serious things, but you can still have some sort of sense of humor that you can find some pleasure in recognizing absurdity. So my original point being the prologue is like Dostoevsky, it's Melville, it gets into music. I'm very into music, as you can see. Um, and that's also very interesting, just how he incorporated, his musical knowledge and affinities into the text. Um, Thomas Hardy, Jude the Obscure, that comes up, as you start, chapter one. Walt Whitman makes an appearance in a way later on in the book. He just, hits all of these things. And what I realized, what I was realizing reading about it was that he looked at it like jazz, right? That you have, like in jazz, you have the melody, somebody sets out the melody, and then the next person comes in and they kind of like riff off of the melody. So it's kind of like making fun of it, but also, having some fidelity to it. And that's what he was, to me, that's what he was doing in this book, this Invisible Man book. I was really vibing with that. And I got into my head that I would write like a indigenous invisible man, whatever the hell that meant. But it was like, a big ambitious statement. And if I said it to somebody, they would be like, "Oh, wow, really?" And I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah."
yeah, yeah. Just
And
you wait.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and I don't know if I found it necessarily, but like, like you can find bits and pieces, and you adjust your ambitions accordingly as you go through. And um, I wrote a novel in grad school. I don't think it was very good, but it was enough to get the degree. And it was the experience of beginning, middle, and end. And after that, I didn't know what I was doing. And I applied to that Stegner Fellowship, and I didn't get it, and that was concerning because I didn't know what I was going to do with this, degree that I had. Um, and I ended up teaching, like kind of gigging, just like teaching a comp class here, a comp class there. Um, and I kept applying to that Stegner Fellowship, and then one day I got the call. And again, it was a thing where it's like I got the call, and I don't know if I knew exactly what I was doing with the writing. Um, so that was also a couple of years of stabbing around in the dark, looking for what that subject was. Anyways, fast forward. I kept on going back to writing about the reservation and politics. I went on a trip with my family one of those years. There was at the casino. We have a casino up in Lac de Flambeau. One of the promo things that they were doing was a tic-tac-toe playing chicken. Yeah. So like you go and the chicken plays tic-tac-toe and you're supposed to play against it, and you win, and you win some money or voucher or something like that. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous sort of thing. But the thing was is that I go around. We went around, to my cousin's house and to my great uncle's house, and just sitting around in the garage. Nice summer day, everybody's just hanging out. And so, did you play the chicken? Like everybody's talking about this chicken, and I think it's funny, it's just like, again, it's like a touch of absurd, that here's the discourse. We're all, sitting around talking about, real things.
Yeah.
But then we have time to talk about the chicken and whether you played it or not. So I started writing a story about that. And the characters were not as formed as they should, they needed to be necessarily, but it was also like this thing where like, oh yeah, here we go. This is now we're talking about politics a little bit, because we're talking about Lac de Flambeau at the time was going through a lot of turmoil. And I was powerless to watching it from it afar, like I couldn't participate in these elections. And that sort of sharpened that sort of feeling of like, I want to be involved. I want to be thinking about this. What's my part? And I'm a writer, so find the story. And it took a long time. It didn't happen after I wrote that story. I tried publishing it, but I don't think it was like an actual story. I think it was just like a snippet. And I'm a little sad it didn't make it into this book.
I was gonna say I need that in the book.
There's a lot
Um,
of stuff that did not make the book. The book had
Yeah.
to be shorter. The book had to be shorter. The book was too long, and that was one of those things that I think had to go. And I don't think I actually made headway until 2016. I don't know why that would be. Just like there was an election
Yeah.
going on.
Random, very random
Random
year. Yeah.
year, but and not only that, but my son was born that year as well, and like which puts you into mind of like legacy and his connection to Lac du Flambeau because he's enrolled, he's a citizen
Okay.
of that nation, um, but without the same sorts of connections that I might have. Right. I never lived there. And my mom, didn't even, we're like removed a couple, but we still have very deep roots there. We still have family that lives there. My grandparents moved back, so like we would go there, very regularly, and you develop that connection, and it's in a lot of ways undescribable, because it is spiritual in nature, and it's personal in nature. And I started thinking about what that meant for my son who's living in San Francisco. He's a San Francisco kid. He's a city kid, and he's also Chinese, right? We
hmm
culturally, we celebrate Lunar New Year. They hear Cantonese all the time, right? So I just like, wow, that must be really confusing for my son. And I think the wheels started, kind of rolling there.
I really love the like idea of absurdity that you seem to keep bringing up because
Yeah,
it almost, especially like early 2016, that's like
yeah,
kind of what it was, and then
yeah,
it obviously wasn't. But
yeah,
it's really interesting to think about it in that way and using politics as a tool. I mean, it's not a political novel. I don't think it would have like half the impact if it was like the US politics, right? It's like there's so
yeah,
much
yeah,
more to it. And you brought up the spirituality. It's much more, all the King's Men, like spiritual search.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, but that's a really interesting, I guess, writing about these like politics of who belongs and who doesn't. And in the novel, Mac, the president, and then Mitch, kind of like the guy who like thinks he pulls the strings is like, whether he does or not is up for question.
yeah, yeah,
One of
yeah,
the things they're doing a lot of is disenrolling people.
yeah,
And so I find it really interesting to be, writing about who belongs, who doesn't belong, and for someone like Mitch, who oftentimes feels like he doesn't belong, to be the one calling those shots. And the biggest thing for me that Mitch keeps coming back to is that like 3 day period where he's at this like fire. I believe the fire is like lighting the way for his mother into the spiritual world, right? And
yeah,
he
yeah,
doesn't really believe in that. He doesn't really have any spiritual life at all. He doesn't know if he believes in these traditions, but he like guards the fire with his life. And so
yeah.
I'm really interested in the spiritual aspect of this novel and how you see Mitch's journey as like political versus spiritual, if that makes any sense. And then,
No, totally. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It kind of goes back to I wrote it. I started writing it as an homage to All the King's Men. That one we discussed.
yeah, yeah.
And because I wanted to write a novel that was going to take place during an election on the reservation, and the immediate story that pops up is not satisfying to me. Because it's who wins, right? And it gets the job done, but there's something about it that's maybe cliched and a little bit determinative and doesn't give the characters room to grow, when it's just about like who wins and who loses. So I started looking into like how do people write about politics, and All the Kingsmen is one of them. The Last Hurrah is another one of them, about machine politics in Chicago, and maybe kind of get at why I was so interested in it. I think that it could have been a very light book if, it had only been about like, look at these ridiculous people doing ridiculous things, for power. It couldn't be just about that and mean something to me. And with All the King's Men, it's ostensibly about politics and it's ostensibly about Huey P. Long, the governor of Louisiana who was assassinated back in
hmm
what was it, the 1940s. And he's the epitome of the machine politician, the governor. But I did find this book, and it has a similar, like there are a lot of like weird similarities. I felt like, and one of them was like the sense of place, the attention to the land, the relationship with the land itself. And I think that's kind of one of those underestimated aspects of the book. Just like this, just that deep connection with that place, and how much, like, we're talking about the genuine article, the person who's like really from there, the person that epitomizes this place. And the thing about all the King's Men is, at the heart of it is this nihilism that the main character has,
The Great Twitch.
the great twitch, and what he replaces, a belief system with, that it becomes, like power at all costs. And that takes on a spiritual importance because there's nothing else there. And, he's pushed off basically everything. And he's denied his own place in history. That's the one of the main conflicts of the book, is that, he's definitely culpable for things, but he's definitely doing that thing where he's like, I it's not me, it's
Yeah.
this guy over
Yeah.
here,
Yep.
um, this monster that I created or I helped create,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, again, you have a character that's not like, he's not the governor, he's the fixer, he's the, newspaper man turned, political hitman. And that was intriguing as an angle, and I hadn't seen that before, and I hadn't seen it, in indigenous fiction. I don't read a lot of stuff, about the governance, and so I saw that was my opening, I think, and that's what I pursued, and then that way it became about something more than just like, look at the crazy stuff that's happening here. It's like I have this spiritual void. I was not brought up religious. I was not brought up like, or traditional, right? With the ceremonies. I think that in politics, the political discourse that we have today reflects a spiritual and moral vacuum. And the way that we talk about politics now is in apocalyptic terms. I'm careful about what I say because I did this for a different interview, and I was like, I don't want to like, just like hand wave away like, huge things, but I mean, there are very, very serious
Yeah.
injustices happening in the world, and uh terrible, there's, genocides happening right now. And yeah, and I certainly don't mean to downplay any of that, but uh I think that the everyday discourse of the things that like really like, just like affect our daily lives, have taken on this sort of apocalyptic importance. And I think that that's because, that there's this void, that we don't have that, moral center, like a shared moral center as much anymore. And, something has to fill that. And I look at it like, a lot of the politics you see, like, you read the newspaper, you watch it, the shows and stuff. It's a show. And like, let's say the last few months and even years is like training myself to like just understand that like most of this is for show. Most of this is designed to get a rise out of you, like an anger response or a despair response. And I think that's very counterproductive to, just start every day, right? So, anyways, that starts getting into the book a little bit. In the book, we got these characters that are trying to win an election, but for what?
Yeah. Exactly.
Power, or they're trying to fill this void that's either spiritual or it's familial. They're missing something very, very vital to themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have like, I mean, that makes me think of like the title. Like what was the big chief? I was like, oh, that's got to be the president, right? It's I mean, it's a SUV. Like it's like a truck. That's the
Yeah, yeah,
title.
yeah.
Why? Like that's the symbolism. Like that's what Mac has. He gets
Yeah.
to ride around town in his truck with his license plate, and that's what he has, and that's what the election is for essentially. It's kind of like I like that what you take from all the King's Men, because people do seem to center their lives around politics. Like it is the entertainment, it's how you define who you are. That's such an interesting thing that I don't think I hadn't really fully formed that idea.
Mhm.
But obviously it rings completely true. And in
Yeah,
this book, like compared to all the King's Men, you have some like examples, right? Like there's that thing where I won't say who Mitch is trying to investigate, but he's like Osterholm once told me that like most crimes come down to three things. And then he lists the three things, and then he's
yeah.
like, well, none of those work. But with all the King's Men, like the guy actually is like the stuff that Jack is doing in all the King's Men, like he finds the thing that works and he creates real crazy havoc and he's like actually very powerful and blows it off. I really like the
Yeah,
choices you made to like veer around that and take a different route because that's so interesting to see somebody who really can't do much of anything and still cares about the power, that much more.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, I
He's
want
definitely more circumscribed. Yeah, he's definitely more limited in that regard. Yeah,
and then things like the Big Shiver and the Great Twitch, like those being aligned, there were things that it was a really cool
yeah.
experience to read all the King's Men and then your book.
Yeah,
But
and because the original draft was definitely more of like a point to point homage,
mm,
and I gave it to my agent. It was about 2021. This was before she was really my agent, Michelle Brower. She's great. I sent it to her when it was done. I sent it to her beginning, middle, and end. Like I knew that it was going to change, but it was definitely more of like point to point, like rise and fall, linear thing with these interstitials of an election, the re-election. So, you'd have these long chapters and like a short chapter taking place in, present day and then go back again and stuff. And she came back to me and she said, it needs to be shorter. And I was like, okay, how much shorter? And she's like, yeah, but I can't remember exactly how many words it was. It was like 140,000 words. She's like, yeah, you probably should get rid of about 40,000 of those words. And I'm like,
wow.
that's a lot. That's quite a bit. I think, yeah, but I did, because what I found was that the real story was that election, and that
Yeah.
those long, big, long chapters, they were dragging the pace down, and so they were not even, like there were some that were just real, I could feel it, but then there were some that was like, okay, this is just surface, right? So what I ended up doing was taking those things and making it background, and then expanding that election, and that was the story. That was the immediacy. That was the urgency. So in that way, it became less of an overt homage, but I wanted certain things, and I wanted people to pick up on them, because I think that those two books are spiritually connected, and in a way, kind of like Ralph Ellison would do with Invisible Man, because we're not just lifting. I mean, we're clearly, right. But there's, we are indebted in certain ways, and this is the stuff that comes before, and this is what I'm doing with it now. So I think that my book, once it lost that, like, okay, this is the frame, it became its own thing, and I was still able to make some of those connections, like what you're pointing out, which I'm glad that you're pointing out. The twitch and the
Mhm.
shiver. I mean, they're cousins.
Yeah, it's almost like the shiver is like the result of the Twitch. It's like the feeling he gets by worshiping the yeah, no, that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
really
yeah,
interesting. And
yeah, yeah.
I like that you said you kept the urgency. I will say like I loved all the King's Men. And I could feel the similarity in terms of like the mind state you're in while reading it and reading your book.
Mhm.
Like you're just like it's such a flow state. I don't get that all the time. But there is like the 100-page chapter where he's, you know, talking about his PhD or whatever research
Yeah.
on his uncle, and I was like, what are we doing here? And yeah, that there's definitely none of that here. It isn't.
Until until you realize that it is a sort of riff on the brothers Karamazov.
Oh no.
That the Grand Inquisitor section of the brothers Karamazov.
About yeah, where Jesus
Yeah.
like comes back and he's not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like a sort of like parable, sort of like interstitial thing, that
Huh.
the story within the story. Because I think that when I encountered it the first time, like, I was probably about your age. I can't remember the first time I read. Isn't that funny? Like, I cannot remember the first time I read these books. All the King's Men, and
Yeah.
because I know I had it in undergrad, and yeah, I must not have finished it, and it might have been because of that. Because like
Yeah.
there's this big giant 100-page chapter where he goes
Yeah.
back in time, to, civil, antebellum times. Um, and like, why?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but again, like it's connected, right? And I mean, I don't know if that's the accepted interpretation, but it is the interpretation that I come up with. Like, man, that looks a lot like Brothers Karamazov right there. And I think if you go back to it, like, give it a couple of years, you'll go back to it and you'll read
Yeah,
it and you'll be like, wow, it's just
yeah.
because that section is amazing. I don't think it's immediately apparent why. Maybe the first 4 or 5 times you read the book. But
So I
eventually you
gotta
see
get
it.
this. I gotta get the six.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. You got to get the sixth reading. Don't you read all books like 7 or 8 times? That there's this, there's this real profound thing that happens, when you're looking at it, and I think you realize that it's the key to the book. It's the key to understanding the book. And I did have that. I mean, in my book, there is a stepping outside of things sort of, story that happens. The old tribal president tells a story.
hmm
Doesn't take 100 pages, but
Yeah,
you
no.
know, like that, the tendency was there, like the intention was there, that to have that similar feeling there. Well, you'll find, young man, is you read these books, and you find the ones that, like, really land, and then you're gonna read them again. Wait, how old are you again?
I'm about to be 21.
You're gonna be 21. So, like,
Yeah.
like they mean a certain thing right now, and then you're gonna come back to this book when you're 30, and it's gonna be something completely different.
Hmm.
And the one that does that for me, I love having an office where I can just grab
Yeah,
books. By
yeah.
the way, it's so wonderful. That one, The Great
Really?
Gatsby.
Huh.
100 years old, 100 years old this year. And that's a book I will read maybe every 4 years. Presidential election cycles
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Um, I had to go find this one because
Oh, the
this
manuscript.
is
Wow. Wow.
a facsimile of the handwritten manuscript
That's
with
nuts.
strike throughs, with like alternate passages and stuff like that. They printed this in the 70s. I think it was like a 2000 print run or something like that. So I had to go looking for this one.
Yeah.
Um, but you just like, you're reading through it and you're looking at his strike throughs and you're looking
Yeah.
at, just the choices and the fights that he's having. I mean, these things just, I don't know, like when you realize something, like because I think that when I was an undergrad, you look at books like, they're set, they're printed, they're set in stone, and they're kind of on a pedestal a little bit. And at some point you realize just how much of a living thing they actually are, how they change, like at the cellular level, at the word level, the sentence level, just like that, even when they're done, like our understandings of them are constantly evolving as
hmm
we progress through life. And if a book is able to do that and stay, intricate like that, like I tend to think very highly of that as a work of art. Like intricacy. I think that was at some point that became like, my benchmark for,
Yeah.
evaluating something.
Yeah.
It's like, how many times can you go back to this thing and find something brand new? Because and because they had constructed it that way. That's a goal for me. Like writing a book that you can go back and,
hmm
see something brand new, and to be continued. Like,
Yeah.
it's definitely the thing. Like I think that there's a lot of big. I put a lot in Big Chief, and I had a lot of fun. And we were talking about the title earlier. I'm
hmm
sorry. I'm sorry if your interview is going off the rails. I don't
No, no, I'm having a
know.
good
It's just,
time.
you're asking the questions, and I don't know if I'm answering them or not. I'm just
No,
talking.
there.
You would reference the title, and the
Yes.
title being like Big Chief, which is like some the provocative,
hmm
in a way. Um, and I do realize I'm talking about this in the readings and the events that I'm doing. But you look at the wonderful cover that they came up with. Um, I did not design this cover,
hmm
but the I always joked. being an indigenous writer, or
Hmm.
I'm a writer, but it happens to be indigenous.
Hmm.
That once the marketing departments got my book, if I ever got a book out there, this is way
Hmm.
back when, um, I suspected that they would put a feather on it. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And there it is,
There it is. Yep.
right there, right next to my name.
There it is.
So like, and with the Thunderbird, and the bear, and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But the thing is, though, it's deliberate. I wanted to take these preconceptions, I wanted to take these ideas and
Mm.
subvert them in a way, because this is like, we don't generally read about indigenous politics, or power, or just how things run. Like, it's all very based on um, ideas that are maybe outdated, and kind of insulting in their outdatedness. And so Big Chief, I meant as a sort of provocation. Like, it makes sense to the character. The character calls it his truck Big Chief. It's just like, this is the way that we joke, right? Just and it's a very Bugs Bunny sort of idea of indigenous communities, um, cartoonish in a way. In a previous draft, I think Mac was obsessed with the Mardi Gras Indians. Are you familiar with this?
No.
It's a very long tradition in New Orleans. It's part of Mardi Gras, the Black community there. Um, there are these tribes, and they put together these very elaborate suits, headdresses, and they put a lot of work and effort into these things, and they go masking. It's called masking, and they take to the streets, and they battle the other tribes, for territory. It used to be real battles too. It used to be like they were shooting each other and stabbing each other and stuff. Nowadays, not so much. um but there's this, the historical thing is that, like, the tribes would take in escaped slaves, and that, that they take on this sort of identity, the indigenous identity. So, like, it's it's an amazing thing. It's amazing music. If you listen to this stuff, it's just incredible. Um, but it's also like, and they appropriate it. Like, there's this sort of cartoonish
Mm.
aspect to it, because, like, the main guy is called the Big Chief,
Mm.
and they have other roles like Spy Boy, Flag Boy, you know. But they have these songs, and they have that old, stilted English sort of thing, me Big Chief, so like, so it's like you're watching it, and I'm watching this. It's just like incredible. It's just and you're like, I don't know, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. The Indian Red, and me Big Chief, me
Yeah.
started the
That's
fight, and you're like, but right, but again, it's like there's like this history behind it, and I think the intention is interesting. Um, Anyways, being in that mindset of things, a Big Chief as a title made sense to me. And because it's meant to provoke, it's meant to bring up these things, it's meant to bring up the outdated things, in order to um I don't know, point out the absurdity, the absurdity of a book about people that are very, very concerned with surfaces, and iconography, and symbols, showing out that way, and whether that is substantive or not, I think.
I think it's really cool to, use the title and the cover in that way because obviously all these themes are in the book,
Yeah.
but I thought you did a great job of like writing on it could definitely be hard. Like the things you are trying to incorporate, especially obviously over some of years, where you're like, I'm gonna write the Invisible Man, but Indigenous or All the King's Men or whatever. Like,
Yeah, I did not start
yeah,
small.
yeah. You seem to have reached a level where like you reach the character level where
Mhm.
because when people read it, they're interested in the characters and their personal lives and their, minor relationships. And they're not, necessarily, yeah, like they're not turning the page because of the theme exactly, but you still have that in there. Was that a difficult thing to do, to kind of work away? I mean, I don't even know if you did, but it seems to me like you were.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, the danger of writing a book about politics is it becomes didactic, and there are certain things you have to avoid, I feel like. One of them is, falling into the tropes, as I said. Who wins, who loses, doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but if that's the central question of the narrative, then things are going to get simple, and I don't like simple. This goes back to be saying, like, I like the intricacy of something. I go back and the thing that I was doing, like, as I'm writing this book, is I'm going back to it over and over and over and rewriting it every time and getting closer to the characters. Like, this book does not happen unless, like, these people feel real to me, hopefully real to the reader. You know, and this book is not interesting to me if I can point out and say, like, this guy is bad and evil, and this person is good. Everything needed to be like shades of gray. And that was what was so exciting about, going back to this thing over and over and over again, because that can be very boring. Is that, like, each time, each go around, there's like a new revelation, something big, about, like one of the Mac is the tribal president, right?
Yeah.
He's the big guy. He's the big, and in the very beginning drafts, he was there, but he was not as serious. He was kind of goofy,
Hmm.
and he was just kind of like a secondary character. Um, and what was happening draft by draft was that he was like kind of like edging himself in a little bit more, a little bit more and more. And then there was a point where it was like that guy's like one of the main characters, like, and he really wants to be there, and
Yeah.
once, like, I opened the door for him, he just like took over, and I was kind of powerless against it, and this is what's exciting about writing, right? And it was like when you have a character like that, it's just like just commands the attention, and like he just starts saying stuff, and you're like, okay, I want to find, I want to follow what this guy's saying. That's exciting to me. Revelations of character are what keep it exciting. If I was going by themes, and like you said, like, like I was conscious of them, and maybe too conscious of it. Like, I was just tossing everything in it. Debut book. you know,
Yeah.
like, I
You're
don't know if
alive.
I'm gonna have
Yeah.
another chance at this. So let's throw everything in there. Identity, and the who belongs to the tribe, and the power, and I'm sure I had a few other things in there. Let's talk about blood quantum. Let's talk about gaming. The rackets that the tribes are doing. If that's the starting point, I think that I find it limiting. I find it limiting, and again, the specter of didacticism. I don't know if that's you know um, that things can get real simple real quick, and when they're real simple like that, like, I don't think a book is worth going back to. You get it, but, like,
Hmm.
if you can find that complexity, I think, like, spending too much time on theme, you do lose out on some of that complexity. But if you're talking about, like, humans and people going through something that's recognizable, I don't know if there's like a scale, like not black and white. Nobody in the book is evil. Nobody in the book is, like, just like doing things to, like, make people miserable. They all have their justifications, and I think that, like, everybody does believe that they're doing good for the people of the Passage Rouge reservation. I think like, even somebody like Buzz Carlisle, who's like the classic machine guy, like that there's this sort of like belief that this is how things go, and people are happier this way. I think that that's a sincere belief that they all have, and I hope that that's coming through, and I hope that that provides that level of complexity that might bring somebody back for reading two or three.
I think the motivations of each character, and you brought up Mac. I mean, he's super interesting because he kind of does start off as kind of like he seems super surface level, kind of like the way Mitch describes him as like the figurehead for like what I'm doing. Obviously, there's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about like how big and strong he is, and he seems kind of like bumbling and all this stuff. But
yeah,
obviously, as we move through the novel, a lot of what's happening is through Mac's will.
yeah.
And then the most interesting part of all that for me was how like they became friends because early on, essentially Mitch is rejected. He's called, this name like J. Crew Indian is what
Yeah.
a lot of people call him.
People have been fastening onto that one.
Yeah, yeah,
All right, that is great.
yeah.
Uh,
But I just say that to say like he's not exactly accepted by people, and Mac is the one who's like defending him and kind of and you kind of wonder why that is, and
yeah,
or maybe you don't because it seems kind of blank. I wasn't wondering. I just thought that was like interesting, and then you get to the end and Mitch has this big realization, and I won't spoil that, but
yeah.
it's
He totally he underestimates Mac in the beginning, you know,
yeah.
and kind of like looks past it, and Mitch is very concerned with the surfaces of things, and he has his suspicions of why, and what he does wonder why, like Mac would be friends with him, and but doesn't think about it too hard.
Hmm.
Until later, as you said, like there's some and in that way, like it resembles my own, development of the character,
Mm.
like because I underestimated him in the beginning as well. I just thought he was some goofball, just kind of what do you call him, nepo baby.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the son of Joe, or the adopted
Yeah.
son of Joe, so I think I put it in one of the readings. He was a sort of Fredo Corleone sort of character,
Mm.
just kind of goofy, not serious, maybe a little bit dumb, but that was that as you get further into the book, like for me, like you spend more time with that character and you realize that there's a lot going on underneath, so much so that it has to come out. And I don't know, that's I think that's what happens.
Yeah, I mean I would agree. I think there's still like even throughout the entire book, there's still parts of it where it's like this guy is, he keeps referring to Scarface, and that's I
Yeah.
like that. But there's other things he refers to that he hooks onto that you're like, well, that's kind of weird. But it turns out to be one of the most interesting ones for me was tap water because at
Mm,
one point in the book, yeah, it's Mac calls out Joe and he kind of tells him Joe's his adopted father, Joe is white, and he kind
yeah.
of tells him like I belong here and you don't.
Mhm.
And he kind of goes on this whole speech about how I like this phrase, he said Joe likes to talk, spooky Indian shit is what he said. When Mac was a
Yeah.
kid about the water coming from the ground, how the ancestors once drank it too, all these different things. And then Mac's like, that's all, that's not you. Like you don't belong to and then I kind of went back to the very beginning and the first thing that was mentioned when describing Joe back in Marine's house was like the water flows clean from the tap. So there's some like
Yeah.
really interesting things that Mac hooks onto that kind of proves. I mean, I it's you writing obviously, but he's kind of like inside the mind of the writer in that way.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very interesting. And I thought like the kind of character that the kind of person who would call their own like adopted father a fraud and really mean it. That's not political.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of those unconscious things, I think, and you pointed out, and I agree with you. I think the water is so important up there, the lakes and everything like that. It just sort of becomes, it's just like a motif that happens. And um, my editor has a weird thing about water.
Hmm.
I've told him this. He just like, I don't know, like for some reason, like I'd get my drafts back, and he'd be like, "More of this," and it was like about the lake or something like that. And I'm like, "Oh, you just really like water," and he does. He like, um, he's a great editor. Just a wonderful, reader, and very careful. Um, I suspect he's a little crazy, one of the crazy people that like runs into cold bodies of water.
Yeah.
Like
It's
he does
a
these like,
big thing now. Yeah.
yeah, he does like I don't know what like the cold water swims because he's out
Yeah.
on the East Coast, so like and apparently he made another author do this. One of his authors do this. He goes into the ocean, into the cold ocean without a wetsuit or anything like that. So he's got this thing about water. So maybe he was like emphasizing these things, and maybe things got shuffled up. But I mean, the lakes are very important to this place. That's the lifeblood of this place, and that particular scene, I think it was this sort of one of those, weird realizations that, the things that I know about my community and the things that I know about, say, Anishinaabe culture, there's maybe a surprising amount of my own knowledge that comes from a white interlocutor in benevolence. This is I don't know, like, yeah, in school, we do like these programs, like the indigenous students program, and uh it was I remember one time, yeah, that the person that was running this thing was a white guy,
Mhm.
without a tribal affiliation or anything like that. um and I mean, that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up in as a theme in the book, is that you do run into characters like that do have, like, a white character who has an affinity with a indigenous community, and they do all the things right. They they're respectful, they listen to the elders, they don't go to where they're not supposed to go, like if they're not, invited into these ceremonies, that they have like this very attuned sense of propriety. But right, like, how what is their level of belongingness? Like in a lot of ways they are stewards of that information as well. So where do they fit? And how do you receive them? And is it appropriation, or is it actual honor? I think that's there's no answer to this question. It just is, right? So
Mm.
that particular moment stood out to me, yeah, just as like, yeah, this is that, right? That we're acknowledging that Joe had introduced this idea to him, to Mac, and this is Mac, wrestling it away from him and
Yeah.
saying that, this is not yours to give, this is not, your culture to dole out, to teach.
Yeah. No, that's really, yeah, I really enjoyed that. A lot of Mac's character development was just so interesting. So I know I sent you a section maybe that we could read.
Yeah,
I figure we could end with that, and I just have a kind of a final question bouncing off that. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, like chapter 17-ish, if you would
Chapter
like.
7.
I know it's
That's weird.
probably
I just
weird
opened. I
to,
just opened it. It just went right to it. That's so weird.
wow.
What witchery is this? All right. The third night of my mother's fire, I drifted in and out of consciousness, exhausted but fighting sleep. It was in this state that I felt a change inside me. It was vague and indefinable, but no less terrifying than the waking dream I was stuck inside. A memory occurred to me, a piece of information I had from long ago. A young man sets out into the woods, leaving the village behind him. He sees nobody and talks only to the Creator for guidance. He doesn't return to the village until he falls into the dream world and lives in it. The elders say that there's sacred knowledge in it, essential for life. He prays, sings his people's songs, fasts, and awaits the Manidu, the spirit that will guide him. One might assume that I learned this from one of those tradition elders out in the old village, but my understanding of the vision quest came from Joe Beck, for what that's worth. I don't claim that I received such a vision on the third night of the fire. I don't know if I fell into any otherworldly realms or communed with any spirits, but I was desperate. And that night I prayed for the vision. It didn't come. But if it had what I've known, what would I have done with such knowledge? For an outsider like me, it's easy to discount the importance of a vision, to dismiss it as a hallucination caused by going without food or sleep for days on end. Regardless of my doubts, that wood smoke blackened my lungs. The sparks burned pinpoint holes in my hoodie. The blood flowing through the veins and capillaries in my hands throbbed along with the orange glow of the ash stirred by the November breeze. Was this the vision? I was outside of my body, looking from above, and I felt the first creep of the shiver steadily climbing up my hands through the tendons of my elbow, my shoulders, stopping to rest in the frozen niche I kept in my heart. I lived inside that niche while the people who came to pay their respects shuffled in and out of my periphery. They murmured about what a shame it was, my mother. What was shameful about getting into a car accident? Yeah, it was horrible. Yes, tragic, morbidly unfair, but shameful? I didn't pay any mind to the noise outside of me, not with the promise of warmth from feeding logs into the orange and white heart of my suffering. When I heard heavy steps shuffling from the courtyard, I fell out of the waking dream and looked up, expecting to see Joe, but instead it was that purple blur ambling out of the darkness. The blur came into focus and became Layla. She pulled her lawn chair next to mine again and settled into another night with me. We would continue our vigil together. You have to come inside, Mitch, she said. Please, you're freezing into a Mitchsicle. I won't have it. Can't, I said. Why not? She shifted the lawn chair closer to mine, our knees touching. Do you think you're the only one who's sad? I'd been thinking just that. Nobody seemed to understand the significance of the yawning abyss of my grief. As though she sensed an implicit harshness in her words, she tried to soften it. We're all feeling it. You don't have to carry it alone. I don't want to talk, I said, and I don't have anything better to do but sit here, if you don't mind. She leaned into my arm awkwardly because she stayed in the chair, and while it felt good, I acted aloof. She tucked her white stocking cap lower down her head and hugged herself tightly, just to show me that she could be as dismissive as I was. I don't have anything better to do either, I guess. Fine then, I said. And as soon as I said, I could hear how snide and unkind it was, but it was the truth. I didn't feel like being kind to anyone, even Layla. Fine then, she said in her lowest register, mocking me. But she stayed. And just like the night before, she fell asleep sitting up in the chair as I listlessly stabbed at the embers in the fire. It did feel better having her out there with me. The sound of her breathing, the sound of her coughing whenever the smoke kicked up, whenever she flinched when the knots in the firewood exploded, I thought were nice little reminders that we were still alive. Deep into the morning, my lungs were heavy with wood smoke, thickened with the cold humidity of the lake. My jeans were frozen to the plastic fabric of the chair. I stirred, and a light dusting of snow sloughed off my arms. There was someone lurking by the house. I looked into the heart of the fire, pretending to ignore that someone until that they thought better of approaching me. What's good, cuz? It was Matt. His baseball cap sideways, his oversized Saints starter jacket buttoned all the way up to his neck to keep out the chill. I hadn't seen him for years. He'd grown a wispy beard and was taller than I'd remembered. Layla woke up to the sound of his voice, yawned, and rubbed her eyes. It took her a moment to recognize him, too, and when she did, she straightened up and gripped the sides of the chair. The sharpness in her voice startled me. Does Dad know you're here? Who do you think opened the gate? He said. You think I climbed over it? You could have, she said. I ain't gonna Spider-Man that fence just to get in there, he said, and he seemed to take a little satisfaction in Layla's discomfort. But I guess the side of me slumped in my lawn chair chastened him into that serious register he could find whenever it suited him to be serious. He could switch it on quick. My respects. I think that's a good one. Good place to
Sweet.
stop.
Yeah, no,
All
great
right.
place to stop. I wanted to I chose that part because one, well, it's just one of my favorite, sections, but I think so much of what I talked about this book when reviewing it and other people too is like how strong the scene writing is, and so much of it lives in present day and present scene. And I mean that's what makes it so captivating, but the flashbacks and like the descriptions and the times you slow down are also really well done too. And I think that's a really great example of that. And again, I love those like that when he's like with the fire, that comes up a couple times in some of those flashbacks. My
Yeah.
question
I-
comes from like later on that same conversation. Mac starts talking about Mitch's mother, and he says she was a good lady. Your mom's. This place just chews up good people like that. This place is poison.
Mhm.
Um, this is a really interesting inclusion because I think it shows like the part of Mac that wants Mitch to be vengeful.
Yeah.
because they both kind of see the place as poisonous, but Mac blames the place and like maybe the people, while Mitch doesn't exactly. And I thought this tied in really well to some parts of things like Invisible Man, where, there's the phrase, one man's throwing stones, and then two other ones are yelling at each other about the stones that are being thrown by the third, like that little
Yeah.
thing. It felt like a lot of the time. Oh yeah, Gloria had a great quote where she was like, our ways are incompatible with the systems they impose upon us, the BIA, Department of
Mm.
Interior. It's like these people who don't care whether you live or die, like the long walk being a great example of that. Why is it that you can
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
throw someone out there and nobody cares if they get back? Like that's not a little, you don't question that. And
Right.
like
Right.
the
Right.
people who are supposed to care are the people who are essentially in charge of your, yeah. So I was wondering how you, how you think about that, especially in this book, but just in general, in terms of like actual politics, where it feels like a lot of um, these tribal politics or tribes and reservations in general are run by, you know, white people, American organizations. So there's not really like who is the election serving? Is it really just gonna is somebody just gonna get in because the FBI would rather them be easy? Like so yeah, I don't know. That's a big
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of them, I mean, specific to the story
Yeah.
itself, as a narrative, because one of the things I'm concerned about, in the writing was making a story where the implication was that indigenous communities can't govern themselves, which I don't believe. I mean, I think there's a lot of examples of governance going right. I think that there are a lot of dedicated people, and but I mean, I also think that uh, you can have all of these people with, who believe their intentions are good, but as Gloria would say, the instruments of it are flawed, and that the rot comes from this system that's imposed, in a place where, that system is not, for lack of a better word, native, right? That this is one of the main things that I wanted to get across, was that a lot of this disconnection, a lot of this corruption, a lot of this, let's say, betrayal of fellow community members, is the direct result of Indian policy of the 20th century, relocation, termination, those sorts of things. And one of the things that gives me the willies, I think, is that, as I was saying, like, with my sons, being citizens of the nation, yet not having that connection, is that, like, there's that part of me that says, wow, this is the point of all of that stuff. The point was, so that, we would be dispersed, and that we wouldn't, we would lose our claim to this land, to this place, because of these policies. And that's one of the big takeaways, I mean, I was writing a fictional book. I'm not writing a persuasive thing, like making a big stand on it. But I mean, if there was anything that I did want to say, was that the policy is destructive, and that's what leads us here. I mean, yeah, like what you're saying, like that quote from Invisible Man, like, like, who's, we're all fighting each other, and and who are we supposed to be fighting? I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, in a way, right? And that's the point of, going through all the trouble here of um giving everybody their humanity, and, making sure that nobody's evil, is that, like it's beyond us, it's beyond our good intentions. There's an institutional thing going on. There's a something that's just bigger than wanting to do good. I can't remember the actual question you asked.
No, no, no. Yeah, I mean, no, that was literally, I don't even remember if it was a question. Half of everything I've done is like said something and been like, I
Okay,
hope.
yeah, that's cool. That's cool. But
Um,
that is, seriously. I mean, like just at the very, bottom of it, it's like, um, there is something nefarious going on,
yeah,
and
no,
and it's a real thing. Yeah.
yeah, I can, I know it would have been, nice to, publish, whatever book you were working on in at Cornell or wherever, but it really feels like you like got just such an incredible understanding. And that's like such a unique mindset to have, to be like, I'm dealing with these broad ideas and I really have to like reach that point where I
Yeah.
understand what I'm trying to do and understand what I'm trying to, a lot of thought went into this book, and that's why, I know I didn't get completely into the nitty gritty of like the characters, and people still not might understand completely what it's about. But this is a book totally worth reading. I mean, it's yeah, I really hope anyone who's listening, you'll check this out. Thank you
Well,
so
I hope it's
much
worth
for
rereading too,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Well, I have to now
I
that
mean, I
I've got like
realize,
all the yeah.
yeah, I mean, I realize that it's not the most encouraging thing in the world, to a writer of about the age of 21, or in the 20s, to say that, man, it took me about 20 years after I started grad school to actually get the thing out. But I mean, it's the truth, right? It's just like, um I don't know, I would not have been happy,
Yeah.
to do less than this book. I feel like the book's doing what I want it to do,
Yeah, it's just
but it took this long.
that standard is so important. And also,
Yeah.
I think it is really encouraging because it feels like at this time it's like, if you don't have the right book by 25, like what are you going to do? It's like you can't. So it's like it actually is really encouraging to see. Yeah, I
It
think.
takes
But
as long as it takes, and you got to,
yeah,
and that's the thing you can't teach in a workshop, is that patience.
yeah.
It's just, I know lots of people, they've been working on their books 9 years like me, or
Hmm.
10 years or even more.
And it doesn't.
And
Yeah, yeah.
you got to be happy with it.
Hmm.
You got to be happy with it. You can't just write a book to get a job. You can't just write a book to, hope you're not writing a book to be famous,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
like, what
That's
are the reasons? What are the reasons?
yeah,
And are those reasonable? I mean,
yeah,
are they realistic? I think
yeah,
so.
for sure. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for this. This has been awesome. Big Chief by John Hickey, out everywhere from Simon and Schuster. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, and huge thanks to John for sitting down with me.
Well, this was a pleasure to have this conversation, and thank you for letting me just talk. So I appreciate it. This was fun.